In 2017, St. Matthew Catholic Church in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, was one of the largest Catholic parishes in the United States, with 1,000 families on its registry. More than 12,000 people attended Mass there each week. It was described as a Catholic megachurch and noted for its welcoming and inclusive spirit.
But after St. Matthew's pastor retired, some parishioners said that the parish's vibe began to feel more formal or less welcoming. The homilies also changed. In one instance, the homilist said that only Catholics could expect to go to heaven, which, incidentally, is not what the Church teaches.
Some people left St. Matthew's, seeking a church with the inclusive Vatican II style they'd preferred. But others moved in to take their place, drawn precisely to the formal liturgy and conservative take on social issues.
A similar drama is happening all over the country, writes journalist Peter Feuerherd in a 2021 piece for U.S. Catholic, covering the conflicts in the Charlotte diocese. People leave a parish because they don't like the politics, or the music, or the liturgy. They seek out like-minded communities where they agree with the pastor's sermons, or where they like the religious education program.
People go parish hopping for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's because of changes in the parish, like the ones at St. Matthew's, and others parish hop for more serious reasons, such as abuse. Sometimes, though, people simply don't get along with their pastor.
Does the Church have an official stance on parish hopping? Are there other ways to address issues in a parish? And what should you do if you don't like your pastor? That's what we're going to discuss on this episode of Glad You Asked.
Welcome to Glad You Asked, where we answer the questions about Catholicism that are easy to ask but not so easy to answer.
Hey, Rebecca.
Hi, Emily. This is one of these discussions where I wonder whether I'm going to need to bite my tongue a lot.
So I actually have a story about this. I was in grad school, and so I didn't really have a parish I belonged to because I went to chapel at my divinity school every day. But I really wanted to find a local parish. I had been involved in campus ministry, Catholic campus ministry, right? And I really wanted to know what it was like to belong to get invested in a community local parish. And so I just started going to churches. You know, the city is a very Catholic city. There were plenty to choose from. I just kind of started randomly trying them out. And I was at Mass, and the homily was about confession and the importance of confession as a sacrament. And then the pastor started going on this tangent about how we confess to male priests because men are made in the image of God and can hear confessions in a way that women aren't. And women can't be ordained because they're not made in the image of God. And therefore, if we confessed to a woman, the confession wouldn't go to Jesus the same way. It was bad theology. It didn't make sense. And I just sat there thinking, oh no, I will never come back here. And so this is not a community that I had any personal stake in. I was a visitor. It was my first time there. I'd gone because they said they had a folk band, which, by the way, was a man with a ukulele. But it does, I think, hammer home the fact that you can have one interaction and think, oh no, this isn't the community for me. I need to find another place. And I think that really is a good example of some of the stuff that we are talking about in today's conversation.
Yeah, and that's that kind of thing. You start thinking, well, if this is what he's saying in this homily, what's he saying in the other homilies? And I do feel like there's some kind of almost a weird curse, so that when guests are at the parish will end up being the time when the homily is bad or the music is bad or something embarrassing happens. But I have certainly been to a lot of weddings in particular where, it's my first time in the parish. I know some of the people. I've never met the priest before. And the homily is so bad, I'm thinking, oh, I feel so bad for this couple. And I would never voluntarily go to the church. And that's just one little detail of all of the things that can go wrong.
I mean, I think we all have stories, right? Probably everyone listening to this podcast has a story about a time when they left or wanted to leave their parish. I think my parents stopped attending the parish that we attended my whole childhood because they had a capital campaign to build a new parish, a new church. And my parents just thought, well, what's wrong with the existing one? The one we have is fine. We're raising like $8 million to build a new church. Could this money be used for anything better? And so there was like a real disagreement about how the church uses its finances. That was eventually one of the final things that kind of pushed them out of the parish community. So I think everyone has like different stories, different pinch points, different things that they care about that affect whether or not they feel at home or feel valued in a parish. So that's what we're going to talk about today on this episode of the podcast. What do we owe our parish community, and what does our parish community owe us? And what should you do if you just don't like your pastor? I'm Emily Zanna, one of the hosts of Glad You Asked.
And I'm Rebecca Bratton-Weiss. Before we get into the interview, though, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors.
Glad You Asked is sponsored by the Claretian Missionaries. The USA-Canada province of the Claretian Missionaries tends to the religious and pastoral needs of vulnerable communities. As part of a global congregation of Catholic priests and brothers, Claretians uplift the dignity of all people, especially those who feel overlooked or forgotten. To find out more and get involved, please visit www.claretians.org.
Now, back to today's question. What should you do if you don't like your pastor?
To answer this question, we talked to Paul Jarzembowski, Associate Director for the Secretariat of Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Jarzembowski is the author of Hope from the Ashes, from Paulist Press, on evangelization, pastoral care, and accompaniment. He is the United States National Coordinator for World Youth Day and serves as an advisor to the Vatican on ministries with young people.
Hi, Paul. Welcome to Glad You Asked.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
A lot of Catholics have had the experience of going to Mass and thinking, this just doesn't feel like home. How common is that experience? And when people say that, what do they usually mean?
Well, I do think that is a pretty common experience for some. We just even looking at the numbers, I would say that over 2/3 of actively identifying Catholics would say that they don't practice regularly. So that's somewhat of an indication that they certainly don't feel at home in that community. But I think that a lot of this, there are probably as many reasons why they don't feel at home or feel connected as there are people who are out there not feeling that. And it ranges, I think. It ranges from people really how they approach the way that they think about church, their life circumstance, the geography where they're at. I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into this. So it's not exactly, I would say, something that's homogenous across all people who experience a disassociation from their parish. But I would say, in general, there is probably more that feel not at home who claim to be Catholic than who would feel perfectly at home in the community they're in.
Should we always expect to feel at home? I guess, so we've been having a lot of conversations around parish community and the expectations that we all go into when we go to a new parish or a new church, right? And I think some of those are healthy expectations, and some of them maybe are unhealthy. We expect everyone to believe the same as we do. We expect there to be our favorite hymns, but
Right.
not the ones we don't like. Right. If we have a kid, we expect there to be a thriving parent group, maybe. So I was hoping you could talk about maybe some things that we should expect from parish life, and maybe some things that we shouldn't.
Yeah, I think that it's important that everyone, I think, I feel like there's two things that when they engage with the spiritual, religious, church-going community, should expect both renewal and enlightenment, but also challenge. Faith is not meant to just be a warm blanket. It's also meant to move us to something deeper, stronger, better, whatever it is that we need to grow in. So I think there's sometimes the expectation that the parish will be that warm blanket and everything will go just as I want it to, when in fact there is that other dimension of why we're part of faith communities, which is to allow the Spirit, to allow God to kind of burn within us and maybe even help us move beyond where we are. And so, yeah, there's probably going to be some things that don't necessarily work out in our favor because we're like, hey, that doesn't fit exactly what I wanted from the experience. But if you, I think it's good to keep in mind those two elements of being part of a community. Certainly, they're meant to, to comfort, to give us joy, to give us a sense of peace. But I think there's also that sense of rattling us a little and moving us a little closer on the edge. And I do think that the unfair expectation we put on parishes is that it's not exactly how I want it to be in my perfect world where I don't have to be challenged. And I do think that that sometimes comes into conflict. Now, I'm not saying that, you have to be a masochist when you go to church either, that, you shouldn't be like, this is in, if it's not giving you a sense of renewal, enlightenment, and joy, that's important too. But also, if it's only giving you joy and enlightenment and everything, and it's not challenging you to go deeper, I think that needs to be taken into account as well.
Yeah, so can I give you an example from my own life?
Please, yeah.
I've been going to this very small parish, and it is all people who are, let's just say, 3 decades older
Okay.
than me. And I go with my 4-year-old son. He is the youngest kid there. I think the next youngest kid is like 10.
Okay.
So they have a very small youth group, and then it's me and my son. And I struggle because there is so much that I like about this community. And yet we go and there's nothing my kid can get out of it. And I struggle with, like, what is my responsibility? Like, do I have a responsibility to stay and create the community that I want to see? I think the liturgy is like you said, it gives, it's life-giving. Um and then, like, how much do I have to force my family to fit into this mold where we're the only people who look like us? And so what would you say to someone in that position?
I obviously every person, and like yourself, will certainly need to discern what is it that you have the capacity to be able to impact. I mean, in a way, a church, like the people of the church are the church, and so every person, from the person who has been there for decades and it has like maybe even a plaque on a pew or a brick in the walkway, that person, yes, but also the person who just walked in 5 minutes ago and has never been there, both of those have equal weight in that community as the people of God. And so yes, the church has a responsibility to make sure that it is addressing the person who's been there for a decade and is literally carved into the stonework, but also the person who just stopped by this Sunday. And yeah, I think there needs to be a discernment that we all need to have, whether or not I feel like I'm actually an fully active and conscious part of this community. And if I'm not, then there's obviously steps that I think every person has to figure out what they need to do to kind of like, all right, have I addressed this in any way beyond just in the car back on the ride home from church saying, isn't that just horrible? I mean, aside from that, discussion with the family, like, has this been raised to someone else? And if it has, there's like these steps, and there's often these steps we probably need to take to really kind of say, okay, if I've done this, do I need to talk to someone else? Do I need to talk to another person? Do I need to talk to somebody in leadership in this community? And then, figure out, all right, if all of these things, if all these steps have been taken, then sometimes, to quote some scripture here, sometimes you need to kind of kick the dust off the sandals and move on to the next house. And that might be where that next step is. But before one does that, it's always good to see if everything has been done to make sure that there isn't a bridge that's been burned, that potentially this could have been a good, maybe if there had been an opportunity for something. So I think it depends, and your circumstance will be unique to anyone listening to this. But I think everyone kind of knows their tolerance of pain, their ability and their capacity to spend the time to work on this. But yeah, I think as long as there is that discernment, and part of that discernment does mean sometimes some work on our part. And again, if that has not resulted in anything, it may be that may be the Spirit's promptings to say, is there another place where you can again find both fulfillment and belonging, but also where can you also continue to be challenged to be the best version of a Christian disciple that God calls you to be?
So let's say I'm thinking of all kinds of my own experiences as well, and I'm sure our listeners are immediately thinking of
Oh yeah,
stories they have. But if you've been in a parish and you've had issues, they're not major, but there's enough of them, and you've brought them up, and you're not feeling like you're being heard. What are some appropriate ways to offer feedback in a parish setting when there are, kind of ongoing issues and you've tried to do your best to deal with them and you just feel like it's not moving anywhere?
right. I think that it's probably good for us to just kind of think about who makes up the leadership or kind of the protagonism of the community. Certainly, a pastor is one of those agents. Yes, and oftentimes people will have an engagement with the pastor that doesn't go anywhere, and then it kind of that's the only engagement. But depending on the size of a parish, there are parish councils where there are fellow parishioners who try to represent the needs of their brothers and sisters in the pews. There are parish staffs. Again, depending on parish size, the staff is another avenue. There are people who are kind of engaged in and leading certain ministries. So I think that if something is not going right, I think who are those point persons that may be there? Sometimes, again, it may only just be the clergy that someone initially goes to, but behind and working with and alongside are pastoral councils, ministry leaders, and staffs who may also be sympathetic ears. It should be sympathetic ears to the people of God that are in their community. And so that could be another avenue in terms of how to raise concerns or even how to share feedback. I think the pastor is one of many ways that it can happen. And having worked in this church for a quarter of a century, I can tell you that they are not all in lockstep. So just because a pastor thinks something or a staff member thinks something, that's not the mean that every parish council member, every staff member, every member of the clergy who's at that community are all in agreement with one another. So if there may be a challenge with one of them, there may be an opportunity to talk to someone else and perhaps get some feedback as to how the best way to go about navigating that system. But I do think that there is, and then of course the fellow parishioners, talking to other people in the pews, seeing if this is it just me, or is this something that, okay, you've noticed that, you noticed that, okay. So I think also talking to one another and reminding ourselves that even though today's culture, we often go to church individually, or I should say, or with our families, we are technically in a community together at that spot that where we're all kind of working together. It doesn't always feel it because we've often entered the church kind of either alone or with our nuclear family, get to our pews. We don't really talk, even the ushers, like, yeah, I got my bulletin, that's fine. So sometimes we don't make eye contact and we kind of do our thing in church. And I think we have to, again, that's part of the challenge for us is to say, okay, do I need to look around and talk to some other people around me and see if this is something as well? So there's a variety, I think, of avenues that can be gone to really kind of find a response to anything that's happening, a concern or a frustration, or even sharing good news. I mean, there could be like, thank you for doing this. This was good. Believe me, I know people who work at parishes who would love to receive some of that as well. Going, did this work? So I think being able to provide that feedback loop in all those different ways, I think are avenues to connect.
So we've been talking about kind of maybe smaller concerns or feedback. Would your advice change if someone had experienced kind of a more serious issue at their parish? Maybe it was abuse of some sort, bullying, hate speech.
Well, and that's the care of souls is paramount in terms of the church's work in any parish or community. So if a soul is literally hurting, if there has been abuse, if there has been hatred, if there have been things that have gone contrary to the gospel of Christ, a person has that obligation to find a place where their relationship with Christ is not going to be blocked by something detrimental, something hurtful. So it's I think yes. I think this is kind of a. I think all of the insights that I've just talked about are kind of on a sliding scale. Like I'm really mad that they didn't sing Amazing Grace when I was. That's really my favorite song, and why haven't they sung it? There's that. There's the homily is really irrelevant to my situation. There's that level. And then you get to the way in which we're talking about people or others, that becomes more problematic. And especially if there is hurt, if there is pain, if there is abuse and violence in any way, that of course is that end of that spectrum of concern. And if it definitely is on that side of things, in various ways, I think you start to get in a little bit more of a serious conversation. And I think there are other outlets for people if there is an experience of abuse, if there is experience of hate speech, if there is any of those experiences, there are also so beyond that, the parish lives in a diocesan ecosystem as well. And so if there are issues that are of very much concern, there are avenues in a diocesan structure to address that as well, because that may rise to the level, and especially if in cases of abuse or in cases of violence or hate speech, I think that does need to start involving those in other means as well, and to involve that. And of course, getting out of that situation as quickly as possible is imperative on the person as well. Like as much as possible, and we need to be aware and kind of keep an eye if that is happening to someone else. If it may not even be happening to us, we may be witnessing it, and how can we be an informed observer and really that Samaritan who helps out as well. So we need to look out for each other in these situations. So and to move people out of harm's way as soon as possible. So yes, I think that yes, it does start to change the more serious and the more detrimental again to our relationship with Christ and His church. I think that has to be a key thing that we work on.
I think that's a really great point about our obligation to look around and see what the needs of other parishioners might be. So often, when a person feels like they've done all of the things,
Yeah.
they've done their best, but it's just not working. This happened with me. I tried to do all of the right things, and I signed up to be a lector. I participated in events. I brought food, and the parish was very, very cliquish. And I finally started going to the Spanish language mass, and even though I couldn't have conversations with most of the people there because I didn't speak very good Spanish, they were incredibly welcoming, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." So, what should a person do? I know some people stop going to church completely, or they might start attending a non-Catholic service in some cases, or they keep on going, but they're just not feeling fulfilled. What are some other alternatives that people might consider?
Well, one you just really shared was is that again, recognizing the ecosystem of a parish is not just the one masses that you go to, or even the language mass that you go to. That there are many communities within a community, and so it could be shifting to another liturgy. You may have to adjust your own normalcy. Like we're always used to 10 a.m. on Sundays. Well, maybe 5 p.m. on Saturday nights or 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoons may end up having that might be to stay, especially if that parish is maybe the only parish that's available in a geographical area, because this is also dependent upon if you live in an area like I grew up in the Chicagoland area, it wasn't too hard to find a church in the city that I could go from one to the next, whereas I know out in more rural areas of the country, it might be, a couple hours before you get to the next parish. So jumping to another parish may not be an option. So you have to kind of see, is there something in that ecosystem? But I think, as I just was just noting just there, we are Catholic, and so that Catholic means that no matter what, finding a community that can meet those needs, that can be a place of, again, of challenge, but also renewal, and so looking at, are there other Catholic churches in the area, and it's amazing because there's also some people I know have also looked at other rites within Catholicism. So like the Eastern Rite churches, Byzantine, Maronite, Chaldean. They've looked at those communities also in communion with Rome and also Catholic churches. So some people say, well, that's a community that's nearby. I might try that. Or it might be just a parish down the road in the next town over that seems to address the things that I am particularly seeking in a community. So I think being Catholic allows us this opportunity to see that. But then there's also forming a community outside of parish life. And that I think is something that we don't talk a lot. We very much, when we talk about our statistics about church going, it's usually relegated to mass attendance. But full participation as a Catholic also means, are there support systems in other ways that aren't necessarily Sunday Mass? Are there small groups? The Georgetown folks, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate Cara, did a study a couple of years ago where they looked at, let's start asking questions about Catholic involvement, especially amongst young adults, that isn't just about what I do for an hour on Sunday or Saturday night. And they found that actually amongst those who don't go that regularly, half of the people who don't go but maybe once or three times a year, they were involved in some other spiritual Catholic thing in their lives, even if they weren't coming to church regularly. They were in a prayer group, they were in a Bible study, they socialized with people, they did service work, they did justice work in that Catholic context. And so that was a support system for those people who don't even come that regularly. And then you add that in, and actually almost 80% of people who do go regularly, at least in the young adult range, were doing something in addition to. And so I think when the community becomes a source of tension, when the community becomes that, if there is that other network that is already existing, that can sometimes be a little bit of a group that can kind of catch those who may be struggling in their parish community. So I think that's another avenue, is finding a net. Before anything should happen, already start thinking about, what is my Catholic support network beyond Sunday or Saturday night for an hour. And if you have that, if things do get bad or things are not engaging for that hour, there is something else that can at least fuel one's faith life in that other way. So I think it's important to establish that, so that there is kind of a safety net of sorts, so that you just don't say, okay, I'm not going anymore, and now I'm not doing anything. So there are a variety of options, I think, that are out there, that allow someone to feel like they're an engaged Catholic, but maybe, again, that parish, that mass may not be where it continues to be because of certain issues.
So we've been talking a lot about what parishioners want from their parish or need from their parish. But does a parishioner have any obligations to their parish? What's the flip side of that?
Yeah. Well, the parishioner has an obligation to Christ, to the church in general, and that is the obligation there by canon law is regular mass, weekly mass attendance. That is the obligation. Aside from that, no, There is not it like when it comes especially to canon law, the obligation is all on the side of the church, not necessarily like you have an obligation to practice your faith regularly, to attend Sunday Mass, but beyond that, the most of the obligations in the parish parishioner relationship are on the onus of the leaders of that community. That community has an obligation to care for all those in their territory. And so even if you go to another parish, the parish that technically is your geographic territorial parish has an obligation to tend your soul. It's the church's way to say, no matter where you are in the world, there should be someone. There is an obligation for some community to look out for your spiritual welfare. So the obligation on the part of the person is certainly to find a community that again connects them with Christ through the sacraments, connects them to a community. They have the obligation to find that, but not necessarily to that one place. Registration is not in canon law, so whether or not you're registered or not is not that is not the issue. I mean, it's good that you register. It's helpful for the church to know who is amongst the community, but it is not required. What is required is for the territorial parish to take care of its people, and for any parish to take care of those who they're aware of that are in their orbit. And then for the person to, again, make that Sunday obligation. And again, the Second Vatican Council also calls us to full, active, and conscious participation. So in that liturgy, but also as lay people in the life of the church generally. And that can take many forms in different ways. So that's really where the obligations lie.
So that kind of leads into the next question about parish hopping, which is what some folks do. I have a family member who's in a very difficult diocese where, and they're very involved, have been involved in parish life for decades, and their own longtime parish has become not just abrasive, but honestly, genuinely abusive. And they're on the parish council themselves, so there's no way they can even address that. So I think what they've ended up doing is kind of moving from one parish to the next, and none of them are great, but it's kind of like, all right, well, I'll tolerate this one this week, and then next week I'll tolerate that one. And I'm sure there's other reasons why people parish hop. We like the liturgy in this one. This one's too far away. Our friends are in that one. What does a person lose or gain by taking that approach?
There's nothing really preventing a Catholic from attending Mass where they go to feel the presence of Christ. So, if hopping is certainly, which is kind of an awkward word, but if finding something somewhere else can fulfill that, then by all means. But I think there has to be this sense of discernment too, also of what is my experience in my relationship to church about. I think we live in a consumerist society, so we sometimes say, well, what's in it for me? As opposed to what is it that I can do to serve others. And so I think the parish hopping kind of tends toward that, making sure I get what I want. And that can be challenging. Now, again, we have to fulfill those, we have spiritual needs. So we certainly need to seek those out, and we need to tend our souls. Absolutely. But we have to just be mindful that we're not making it about, I want to go to the place where everything checks all the boxes for me, that I'm going to feel like I'm not challenged. I'm not in any way, moved beyond my own self. Sometimes I wonder that when we go looking for a parish in that way, does the parish just become an extension of our own ego? Because we found a similar community of people who think like us, vote like us, talk like us, and then we end up becoming very polarized. And you've got the parish over here that's full of these people, and the parish over here that's full of these people. The original beauty of a neighborhood parish was that you had people who thought in all different directions, but because back in the day when there was no transportation to get around very easily, you we're kind of forced to come together and worship God with somebody who you don't agree with at all. And there was a certain beauty in that Catholic notion where here comes everyone. But when we parish hop, that ability to find a community where we can reconcile and learn and live and love our differences and still, find community in that can sometimes get lost, because then all of the people who think like me are in the same place. And that creates, again, areas of division. And then you get groups who perhaps get very toxic in their homogenous nature, where diversity is anathema. And so it's all people who look, and this is something that I'm not saying is uh, one side of the church or another side of the church. Everyone kind of struggles with this, that we cling to that homogeny. We cling to the idea that I am around with people who just think like me, who look like me, who talk like me. So the danger of parish hopping is that we can, if everyone parish hopped to the place where they were just perfectly at bliss, would we have communities that exist to again challenge us? That I keep coming back to that, because again, it's not just the preaching that should challenge us. It's not just the word of God that should challenge us. It should be even the other people, the other people we walk in with. If you're in a community and there's a baby crying and you're annoyed by that, and you want to leave that community where you can go someplace where there's going to be no more babies crying so that I can listen. Um, where is, then you have taken yourself out of that equation, or you've taken that mother, that family out of that equation. And I think that parish hopping is important for those to find places that feed their soul, but as long as we have to be mindful that we don't want to just find just that perfect mix where we'll never be upset and everything will be just fine. So there's losses and gains to this, and so I think with all things we do it with a discerning spirit.
It's funny you brought up the example of the baby crying, because we have this article that's about 10, 15 years old on our website, and I think it has generated the most comments of any article ever, and it is about whether there should be crying babies at Mass. This is something people care strongly about.
Well, I knew that people care about it when they're in there, but even the way you frame the question, of course, that's
right.
do they belong? Yes, belonging is part of who we are as Christians, as Catholics, and so yes, that child belongs, and now, there's prudence, there's also prudence in all places, how you deal with that and things like that, but um, you know, but at the same time, even if it continues on and there's that stress that's involved with it, um, I've often found myself saying, because I'm trying to hear the homily and I can't, because the pew five, someone 5 pews behind me has a very rambunctious child, and I sit there and go, okay, yes, maybe I want there to be a little more silence so I could hear, but it's the Holy Spirit sometimes saying to us, look who's around. And yeah, you don't have a clamoring child in front of you, but someone else does, and what a beauty that is, what life that is in that community. And so I think that part of being around others, it can make us uncomfortable at times, but God bless uncomfortability, because I think often that's where the Spirit shines brightest, is when we are confronted with things that are outside of our normalcy. And we don't grow when we just are surrounded by everyone in our own little, silo, as it were. So I look at that as a blessing, and thank God for life. Thank God for that family. Thank God for their presence. And thank you, God, for challenging me to not worry. Maybe my time in this community is not so much about hearing the exact details of Father's homily, but maybe it's about reflecting on the joy of community at this moment. Maybe that's where my heart needs to grow, and that's where God is kind of nudging me through the cry of the child. So I don't know. Those are some thoughts that kind of occur to me with that kind of situation.
Thank you. So summarizing kind of this whole discussion, what would you say to someone who loves their Catholic faith but feels discouraged by the experiences they've had in parishes?
I have been thinking that there's three things. I think there's probably more than three things, but I've come up with three things that any engagement with church is about. It's about meeting Christ. It's about meeting others, and it's about being. It's the management of those meetings by our church leaders. And sometimes that's the order in which we should engage any type of community is am I having an encounter with God? Is my spirit being moved by the living God? First priority. The second thing, am I meeting people along the way? We're the people of God, a pilgrim church. Vatican II said we are a church on the move, and we are the people of God. So am I encountering the people of God? And then the last thing is who's involved in managing all that. But I think oftentimes when we come with our parishes, we flip that. We think first about like our attitude towards those who are managing this affair, the pastor, the parish staff, and and then we maybe think about who's around us, and then finally we think, oh yeah, was that a place I found God? I don't know. And we often make decisions on moving about and challenging ourselves based on the who is managing all of this. And don't get me wrong, these are important roles in our community. Our pastors and our pastoral leadership in our communities are very important. But we go to engage with God, with Christ, to find him in the Eucharist, to find him in that way, to be amongst other people. And then finally and so when I look at a community, and I've been in churches where I have felt all three of those things were like perfectly in lockstep. I felt the presence of Christ. I was enjoying the people around me and the homilies, the direction of the parish, the programming were wonderful. And that's great if that can all happen. We're also realists. And so sometimes one of those things is not going to be the best. So I think paramount should always be, am I having an encounter with the living God? Is in through the Eucharist, through the Word, am I finding that? And if so, that is first. Am I meeting other people? Am I discovering the beauty of diversity around me? And if so, great. And if the homily isn't that great, if the programming isn't that great, how much does it distract me from the other two things? And I think that's the key thing is the thing, and oftentimes it's that third thing. It's the leadership of a community. It's the direction of a community by its leadership that is often the tension point that drives people either away or towards disillusionment or towards hopping or whatever you want to call it. And so I think it's all a matter of discernment whether or not that third element is, if it's preventing the other two from really being fruitful in your life, then yeah, move on and find a place where you can find God and community in a beautiful way. Or find another mass. Like, you went to again, I love the story of going to even a mass where the language wasn't even your own, but yet community was felt, and you felt the presence of the people of God in the midst, and that sense of belonging, even though you may not have understood the words. Those are strategies to make sure that those first two important things are there, and we can manage through the third. And sometimes it means challenging, and maybe sometimes by stepping up as a leader in a community, maybe some of that can be adjusted. It happens. You maybe stepping forward might be the thing that says, okay, maybe I need to adjust. That's maybe something that a pastor or pastoral staff may say, oh, you know what, I didn't realize this was affecting people in this way. We need to adjust. That can happen. And so, if that's what it takes, or again, if you've tried all those things, if you've talked to enough people, knock the dust from your sandals and move on to the next town, if that's possible.
So we always close these conversations by asking our guests, if our audience takes away just one thing from this conversation, what would you want it to be?
I would say find in a community. First, again, I think I just keep saying, find God, find others in community, and all the other things. And if you can't do that, find ways to make it happen in your life. Because I think our relationship with God and our relationship with one another is most critical. Our relationship with the logistics of how a community is structured are nice, but that is not our obligation. That is not our call as people of God. So go where there is that life-giving God, and that life-giving community.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today. That's all the questions we have.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I know that let's pray for each other, because I know that no matter what challenges we're facing, I think it's always good to also pray for one another. And so know that you'll be prayed for, and all your listeners will be prayed for if they're struggling through it. In my work, I certainly want to be able to pray for them, and that people find where they need to be.
Thank you.
So, Emily, I feel like that was a very hopeful conversation that we just had. Was there anything that came up that surprised you?
Yeah, I kept waiting for him to say that to some extent you should just get over any difficulties you have with a parish, right? Like, no community is perfect, no person is perfect. We have a responsibility to build the kingdom of God, and part of that is like creating our church community. And I was surprised that he said that actually the obligation falls more heavily on the parish than the parishioner, that the parish has a responsibility to each and every person in its geographic boundaries, but the individual has no responsibility to build that parish. It is almost entirely one-sided. And I just thought that was so counter to what I think about when I think about like my responsibility to any sort of faith community, and also kind of reassuring in a strange way. Right? Like, the church is just there for you. You don't have to like it.
Yeah, kind of like a ask not what your parish can do for you type thing is I feel like what we've often gotten. And that was actually the thing that stuck out for me too, was that I've all my life been told, over and over and over again in Catholic spaces, it's not supposed to make you feel good. You just need to deal with it. If you're having a problem with it, carry your cross. And it's very refreshing to have that frustration acknowledged, the frustration of feeling that your parish it's not just that your parish isn't ideal, but that they haven't been there for you at all. It's okay to move on.
Yeah, on the plus side, like, I really wanted him to have an answer to, I mean, I think I talked about this in the conversation, but I am having this kind of constant like struggle to find a community that has everything that I need, right? Like, I have a small kid. I want to go to a parish or a faith community that welcomes and also teaches my child. And I keep finding these parishes that are great, but they're all old people. And so, like, what responsibility do I have to kind of stick around and like build that up to create the community that like I need to see? Or do I just like keep looking for different communities until I find one that has children? And they're there, right? Like, they exist. Of course, there's Catholic parishes in my town that have children. Like, that's not a problem. It's just the ones that I find like spiritually fulfilling or like accessible are these like very small parishes. And I don't know, like, I wanted him to have an answer. And I didn't feel like I came out of there with like, I should do this. But I mean, I think that's the point, right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for discernment. Like, I mean, I'm kind of jealous of you because I'm like, oh, wow, you found parishes that are welcoming. I'm kind of at the point where if I just don't have to deal with hearing really problematic ideas, sometimes preached from the pulpit, I'm like, okay, cool, this is great. Like, there was one Christmas we went to Mass, and the pastor had actually been in jail for a while because of financial mismanagement, and he was out, and his choice for a homily for the Christmas Eve vigil was to sing the Christianized version of Leonard Cohen's Alleluia, which is generally considered kind of cringy, but he had a really good voice and he just wanted to like share it with us. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Oh, I'm good with this.
I also think that starts to get at something that we also talked about in the interview, which was that this kind of reframing of parish hopping, that it's not like a personal failing for you to want to find a community, but that like it's more of a structural critique about how homogenous our parishes have become, and that is like that breeds toxicity in all directions, right? Like just homogeny, you start to live in these echo chambers, and the potential for abuse and for like a toxic culture just becomes much more pronounced. And I really appreciated that it's not, there's nothing wrong with trying to find a community where you feel welcome. It's more of a kind of a structural critique that we have kind of forgotten how to create and exist in thriving, diverse communities where we're not all the same. Whatever that looks like across like all sorts of spectrums, right?
You know, in an ideal world, that's what we'd be seeing, where a vibrant Catholic parish is a vibrant parish that is welcoming and it's not just you're welcome. It's once you've arrived, we're going to have this ecosystem and this infrastructure for community existence and community support and education and multi generations, and even having some space for ideological disagreement there too.
See, that's all I want in a parish, Rebecca. Is that really too much to ask? You just described my ideal parish. Why can't I find it?
Meanwhile, my ideal parish is super traditional liturgy and hardcore progressive theology. So it does not exist anywhere that I know of.
So I think that kind of gets at our next question, which was there anything that you wish we had been able to talk more about?
Yes, as you've probably guessed from my comments, some of my issues that I've had with parishes have been quite serious. And I've developed a pretty good tolerance for dealing with minor annoyances. But when it comes to the point of, say, a pastor victim blaming a survivor of clergy abuse from the pulpit, that's when you're running into really serious issues that I genuinely would like to have guidance on. And I do think that it's important to distinguish issues like that from the kind of issues that we've been largely discussing, where, you know, the demographics are different or the liturgy isn't to my taste. And I think related to that is the question of, you know, if you go to the structures of power and it's not being addressed, it really taps into just a broader issue that a lot of Catholics are dealing with, is the abuse crisis in the church. And what are you going to do about that on a parish level?
Yeah, there was this whole difference between like the structural versus the personal. And I think that we could have teased that out a little more, right? Like the personal disagreements, the personal opinions or preferences are one thing, but what you're talking about is like structural misuse of power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are asking, well, what do I do? What do I do with that? How about you? Was there anything that you wanted more information on?
I mean, I think there was just so much like good lines that we didn't have time to go into. I appreciated he mentioned kind of rural parishes really briefly, that a lot of what we're talking about is all fine and good for people in cities or even people like where I live in the suburbs, where I have, you know, dozens of churches within 20 minutes of me. But that if you're where you live and you're 2 hours from the next parish, that decision to like, oh, well, just kick the dust off of your sandals and go somewhere else isn't really an option. So that was one thing I kind of like, he mentioned, I appreciated the acknowledgement, but we didn't really get into like, well, then what?
Yeah, it's that geographical privilege is a very real thing. And I think it really affects how people experience their faith. I mean, we've talked before about people having just such wildly different experiences of Catholicism, depending on where they live, depending on the schools they went to and the churches they went to. And it would be helpful to have more acknowledgement, I guess, of just the reality that you can feel trapped.
So kind of given all of the stuff that's come up, right, what sermon would you preach?
Despite the fact that Paul really emphasized that the parish is there to serve us, my sermon would be that we all are still the church. And when we attend church, the way we relate to other people there is the way in which we present Jesus. So when you go to church, whether you're a regular parishioner, whether you're visiting a parish for the first time, whether you feel at home there, whether you don't feel at home there, the way in which you treat those people among you, the way in which you represent the gospel is building the church one way or another. What would your sermon be?
I think mine is similar. I keep thinking of what you said about the ideal parish community isn't full of people I agree with all the time. I do think that a community, any community, is healthier when there's diversity of belief. And so I think there's a sermon there about what it means to worship with people who we disagree with, and what we lose when we just feel like we can opt out of any sort of disagreement. Because I think you're right. I think we've gotten, in our society, just far too comfortable opting out.
And that's our show. Thanks again for joining us for Glad You Asked. If you enjoyed the episode, please tell your friends about the podcast, or leave us a review or rating on whatever podcast platform you listen to. It helps more people find our podcast.
Do you have a question you'd like to hear answered on our show? Email us at editors@uscatholic.org. And please join us next week when we talk about what young people want from the church today.
Glad You Asked was made possible by the support of our sponsors, the Claretian Missionaries. The Claretian Missionaries in the United States and Canada are seeking young men who feel called to grow in their relationship with God and to serve others. To explore a vocation with the Claretian community, please visit myclaret.org. Glad You Asked is hosted by me, Rebecca Bratton-Weiss, along with Emily Santa. We are produced by Stephanie Clary, with sound engineering by Nathaniel Hunter and art by Megan Avery.